Fancy. Hello and welcome everyone to the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance's Crypto Roundup for Friday, September 6, 2024. Ron Quaranta here with my amazing co-hosts, David Brill and Joshua Ashley Klayman. Before we begin, thank you all for joining us. Our usual disclaimers, obviously, nothing that we're discussing should be considered any kind of investment, accounting, or tax or legal advice, and or token advice, certainly. And then obviously everything Josh and David and I are talking about is our own personal opinions. Doesn't necessarily represent the opinions of our firms. Thank you all for being here. If you have questions for David or Josh or I on LinkedIn or Twitter and YouTube, please put them in the chat. We're happy to address them. With that, we got our fancy countdown music going. Josh, David, good to see you both. Summer is over.
Yes. Great to see you. I think my head's spinning with everything that's going on today.
Yep.
Do you mind if I just ask you, guys, what's going on with the markets? Please get your crystal balls out or something and tell us.
I'll start, and I had visions at 8:29 of David and I and Josh watching either Bloomberg or CNBC, waiting for David non-farm payrolls came out this morning, and the number was below estimates. I think it was 142,000 came out in new jobs. They expected 161. And David, the big news again is revisions to data. June got revised. July got revised. We can imagine August is going to get revised. And what this tells me is, are things worse than we think they are? Because now a 50 basis point Fed rate cut, there's a 50-50 chance of that, David. 6 months ago, we weren't even talking about that. What were your thoughts on the data?
Well, one thing that's really interesting is that the June data has been revised down twice.
Yep.
In a short amount of time. So that's a little disconcerting. But look, I think, as we've said here month after month, the job market, and I think especially on the white collar side, is more challenging than what's being reported. And the sort of fancy math that's being used with temp jobs and things like that are kind of obfuscating a little bit that the white collar side is more challenging. And so I think people are not necessarily surprised by this, but it is unfortunate we're seeing numbers reduced twice. I think at some point there has to be some quality control here.
David, you and I are old enough to remember how the Fed approached it across different Fed chairs going back decades. And I think one of the lessons we've all learned in our lives is that when the Fed starts looking at this data and when they start seeing numbers that are constantly revised, and I don't mean this to sound as apocalyptic as it's going to sound, it's already too late. And what I mean by that is, everyone's been talking about soft landing for a long, long time, and we'll tie in crypto, we'll tie in markets, obviously, but there's a fair share of economists who say that may not be as soft a landing as you think it's going to be. Josh, David, am I wrong? Do you kind of see that same perspective?
So I also wonder aloud, if this wasn't an election year, if the numbers would look a little different.
The conspiracy.
I'm not a big conspiracy theorist, but it's just something that does come, cross my mind. Look, I think one thing I do want to say is that, 4 to 4.5% is what's considered full employment.
Yep.
For the market, and we're at 4.2, 4.3. So I don't think there's any reason to be I can't say it today, but I don't think there's any reason for people to really get concerned really start worrying. But things are slowing down, and the soft landing is the kind of landing that when you land a plane and sometimes you're going in really fast and it just sort of doesn't feel so soft. That's kind of the feeling I think with what's going on here. It's like the plane's landing, but you're coming in a little too fast and you're feeling a few bumps as you're landing.
Well, so I have a question, guys. Yeah. And I realize this is a bit of semantics, so I'm just more interested in your thoughts generally. But when we talk about a soft landing, that presumes we're still aloft, right? Some of these number revisions just make me think that we've already landed somewhere, and you know what I mean? It's just if this is true, what are we landing from? But anyway, what are your thoughts on this?
So you hear these kind of phrases in the markets like soft landing and full employment. And David, I often forget that, we know it, but maybe outside of the three of us, it's just worth explaining. So, the soft landing is the idea, and I'm paraphrasing in general, that um, job growth minimizes within parameters that the government, the Fed, expects,
Mm.
along with disinflation meeting targets, meaning inflation slowed down to a point where prices aren't rising faster than things like cost of living, and the bottom's not dropping out in new market participants, people who are looking for jobs. Like the idea of full employment as well. David, for those who may not know, full employment means essentially that everyone that does want a job can get a job. And even in the context of that, there's still going to be some portion of the population that doesn't have a job. But 4.2% is phenomenally low over the course of many, many decades. So Josh, you're right. I feel like every time I talk to economists, I say soft landing, they think three different things at any particular time. And I want to point out one other thing, if I could, and both tell me if you agree or disagree. David, you and I beat up on the data a lot.
Mm.
We beat up on BLS a lot, and often justified, but these are very complex data sets. Like, interestingly, when you look at, you talked about white collar versus blue collar, and the impact on markets, there's a lot of dynamics around, is that a full-time employee? Have they moved to part-time employment? There's a new data metric around, has someone who was formerly full-time who now has two part-time jobs, how do they show up in the data? Guess what? They're probably not showing up as full-time employees. So I don't mean to make fun. It is very, very complex, but it is also very reactionary, meaning the data is old by the time we read it. And that's a problem for markets in the 21st century, I think.
Yeah, look, I agree. Again, we have to zoom out a little bit. With COVID, we had full employment. I think there is still a lack of people to work in sort of the more blue collar sort of food services and hotel services type jobs. So there are jobs available. I just think that the white collar job situation is probably being underreported. When you think of a company like Intel laid off 15,000 people after they got 10 billion from the US government,
Yeah.
you've got to believe that they really didn't want to lay off all those people, but were compelled to, and still did it even despite getting this $10 billion from the government. So I think you're seeing in places that were very robust, things are slowing down.
And guys, like, it makes me think back to what we discussed partly last week about how we've heard unofficially from certain sources that there may have been vast overhiring at certain federal agencies that are taking interest in crypto.
Yep.
Since so many of the job numbers seem to have come from government, even to the extent that they are not revised down further, what one has to wonder, if there was an overhiring, will these jobs last?
Yeah.
My sense is that government jobs aren't ones that are sort of transient. I think once you're hired by the government, you're sort of
That's fair.
there for a while. That being said, it could create a situation where the normal hiring cycle next year could be much lower, or even less, depending on who wins. And so, this could be a little bit of like stuffing jobs this year and knowing next year there's going to be, either little or no hiring too.
And David, it's interesting. Again, I don't mean to, yeah, and I agree with you, Josh. I think it's the government jobs, David, and what we can call government adjacent jobs. I think the second biggest category outside of government jobs was state governments and large healthcare companies. I don't even know the economics of whether or not they'll continue to hire. But David, I'm building an econometric thesis, and I wanted you to tell me if it makes sense. I'm looking in the context of what we're seeing in the markets, and it's been rough for the past couple of weeks on and off. If it's been rough in regular markets, it's been really rough in the crypto markets.
Mm.
David, are crypto markets leading indicators of macro trends?
That's a great question. I think short term, like we saw a few weeks ago, or maybe a month now, when we had that big sell off because crypto trades 24/7, we saw that action in the crypto markets on that Sunday that preceded the sell off in the stock market on Monday. I think that the crypto story is a little magnifying what's going on in the markets, but I think it has its own storylines that are playing out here. So I'm going to say there is some correlation, but I think there's some specific storylines playing out in our markets that are different and, playing out in a way that, we're seeing it and we're feeling it. And because I think, the total market cap is now down to 2 trillion in the crypto markets, these moves are exacerbated because you're seeing, 5 or 10% moves, whereas in the stock market, it's just it's a smaller move.
Yeah. I mean, when you see the Joshua Klayman family office unloading, 7, 8 digits at a time, the market's going to react.
I mean, I thought last week I was the mysterious wallet that was buying up.
We've got to pull you into the conversation. You're the
Yes.
one moving funds. I'm kidding, Josh.
Josh, I still think you're that 100 BTC buyer. You're just being
That's what I was saying. Like,
I know. I think you're just being really stealthy about it.
Yeah.
Talk about dollar cost averaging in, David.
Look, I will say this. I think like the fear and greed index is down to 22, and it goes from 0 to 100, 100 being greed, extreme greed, 0 being extreme fear. And this is the lowest for the year. And so I think people with courage, they always say to buy, when people are selling, and then sell when people are buying. And I think if you have a fundamental belief in crypto and the ecosystem, I think this is an excellent time to dollar cost average or like consider tokens or projects that you really like and consider taking a position. And I say that broadly, but I really
David, you've been touting that, and the three of us have spoken about that for a long time. If you don't understand the use case, if you don't understand the platform or the token or whatever it's meant to accomplish, don't invest in it or don't do it. And again, that's not investment advice per se, but I think one of the other aspects of all of this is, and I know there will be some people watching who may hate the fact that I'm saying this. Josh, David, tell me if you disagree. The kind of get rich quick token economy perspective is going away. And that is long-term a really good thing, I think. But what do Josh, do you agree? I mean, you don't see fly-by-night token offerings crossing your desk, Josh. You see real projects. What are your thoughts about that?
I mean, yes. So I do see real projects, but that's not to say that other projects, that there might not still be some folks. I mean, just to take the other extreme.
Yeah.
I think as long as, I think for those who are spectators to our world, as the price goes up, suddenly there's interest, and probably it does attract some people who think they're going to get rich quick, right? Because then it's back in people's minds. But I agree with you. I mean, at this point, our industry has matured considerably over the past decade, and even over the past couple of years. I think post November 2022, it's a different world. And so I do think that, I mean, the money that we're seeing come in terms of interest from not interest in the financial sense, but just institutional interest in digital assets and builders building. I mean, I think it's far away from the snake oil salesmen that people used to point to in the
which makes that kind of, it's the Wild West perspective begin to minimize over time, which I guess, David, Josh, brings us to there's more in the markets. I feel like the three of us can go on for another hour just on the markets. And David, you and I can talk VIX, and I'm not wagering on VIX targets with you ever. But there is the kind of, there's the election, David, that you raised, and Josh, there's the regulatory overhang still in the space. Have you seen anything that's changed or evolved in the past weeks?
Well, so I have a question first.
Yeah,
because I can't be the only person who doesn't know this, and if I am, everyone in the audience can laugh at me as well as you guys. But what are you talking about? VIX? What are VIX?
So the VIX is short for the Chicago Board Options Exchange Volatility Index. And the VIX is a measure of overall risk in the market and perceptions of risk and market conditions. So by way of example, I think the VIX this morning, it's very wonky kind of Wall Street stuff, is in the 22 range, which is, not the sky falling. By way of example, in the 2008 financial crisis. David, correct me if I'm wrong. I think the VIX hit 82.
Yeah.
Which is basically the sky is literally falling. Let's just head to the basements. It's all over. I think in the more recent crash from 2-3 weeks ago, it spiked at 60. So it really is a gauge, Josh, of overall market sentiment and risk tolerance. As that number moves up, the markets overall are seen to be much more risky.
That makes sense to me. Thank you for explaining that. And apologies, I just figured
No,
like if I wasn't familiar with it.
if you would have known that, I would have been more worried about you.
But,
Well, I'll do it for next week.
but you have to remember, people who jumped in at the end, at the bottom of 2008, 2009 had spectacular returns. And so, again, it's really about having a thesis and believing in your thesis. And if your thesis hasn't changed, then the price on some level shouldn't really guide, what your belief is. If your view is that, artificial intelligence tokens have a place in the ecosystem going forward, like just because they may have sold off 20% doesn't change the idea that they have a use case that can be integrated into, business and, be integrated into these platforms. And I use that as an example because AI is so popular right now, but there are definitely use cases. And I would just encourage people just to sort of not just stay calm. Like there are sell-offs. I think Bitcoin is still up 30% for the year. I think Ethereum is up less for the year. I'll check while we're on the podcast. So I think all things being equal, I think everybody sort of wanted to be at an all-time high already. And I think that may come. But I also think because the election is coming, I think that's creating a dynamic, especially for crypto, that some people are on the sidelines waiting to see what happens.
I want to put that in context. I fully agree with David. I almost always do, Josh. But, during the financial crisis of 2008, a VIX of 80, you've got to have some nerves of steel and dry powder to be going to a market like that, because that was tough.
Well, you know what, Ron? When Citigroup got to $2, I was kind of the view that if they're going to go bust, well, we've got bigger problems.
Yep. Some of our best purchases.
So look, I think if you look at where we all think, this ecosystem is going, you're getting a very interesting opportunity to get Bitcoin and especially Ether, which has really been taking a hit, far below where we all thought it would be. Like just for an example, Ether's around 2,200. The all-time high was 5,000, 4,800
earlier this year. Yeah.
And so and even though the network activity is down quite a bit, it's probably down to a 3-year low. Has Ethereum suddenly been degraded on such a level that it's worth 60% of what it was? And it may not have been worth what it was at that point. But my point being is, I think you just have to have a bigger, a longer view and just not a narrow view.
Yeah, like if you think about the timelines when they show the price and you expand, like you have one day and it's like, or if you expand it out 5 years, 10 years,
or even just, a year or 200. There's moving averages are based on these 200-day or 200-week moving averages. And that gives you a little more than 6 months to look at things. So I think you just have to zoom out a little bit.
I want to point out to the audience, and whoever our guest is on Josh's cam, we will make them an honorary member. I just want to point out for the audience, David Brill invoking Ben Graham value investing parameters in the crypto world, David. And kudos to you, because I don't think I've heard anyone approach it in that way. And you are 100% right.
I appreciate that. It. Look, I really think that we just have to have a little bit of a longer term view. And the last thing I want to say, and going back to a point made before, we still have these narratives of, we don't know how much Bitcoin Mt. Gox is sold or is selling. I think most of it has been, sold, distributed now, and some of that selling has gone on. The U.S. government still has $2 billion worth of Bitcoin, and we don't know exactly what their plans are. So we still have these overhangs. And then at some point in the fourth quarter, FTX will make a distribution of somewhere, between 10 and $12 billion of fiat to their holders that, one would think some percentage of that will go into crypto. So we have these kind of headwinds on one hand, and then some positive, treading on the other end. So those are unique things to crypto that we're not seeing in the stock market.
And David, that's a perfect cue up for the FTX conversation we were planning to have, and we talked about this in our prep messages. David, if I remember correctly, and Josh, correct if I'm wrong, FTX settlement out of bankruptcy, it looks like they were going to be able to offer millions of dollars in value, potentially in stable coins, if I read correctly. And immediately the Securities and Exchange Commission said, yeah, we might have a problem with that. Josh, why? Well, that might be a harder question than we thought.
I mean, it's not an easy one, but I think the fact perhaps that it was styled as cash and then also stable coins, right? To have those treated essentially as an equivalent, I think that's what the SEC is balking at versus, if that's the case, we don't know yet, although we have seen in the case that involved Binance and BUSD, that Judge Jackson did dismiss at the motion to dismiss phase the claims that BUSD was a security. Because in her view, as I recall it, there was no expectation of profit, right? Which seems pretty obvious in the case of a stable coin, particularly a fiat-backed one, fully fiat-backed one. So I think, notwithstanding that, I think in a number of instances, we've seen the SEC, despite, and as we've said for a long time, these district court decisions, they're not binding on other judges, even in the same district.
Right.
And so just as defendants have tried bringing similar claims, invoking the major questions doctrine and things like that, I think we can expect that the SEC is likely to continue to bring claims in different jurisdictions, trying to see if one, if they get a favorable ruling. Could be wrong, but I think they're just not ready to concede that stable coins cannot be securities or are not sometimes securities. Of course, we always have to look at the facts and circumstances. We always have to look, if you look at SEC v. Do Kwon Terraform Labs there, Judge Rakoff did say that, that stablecoin, which was algorithmic and troublesome, as we all know, was marketed along with marketing of the Anchor protocol. So I just think, by conceding on this, it seems the SEC just isn't ready to let go of that.
Josh,
argument.
to that point, though, David, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. Is it so obvious? I'm like jumping out of my chair to push back.
I can feel David wanting to jump in on this.
Look, I think that let's break it down. Like Coinbase is the custodian for the ETF filings, or the majority, and so is BitGo.
Yeah.
If people on FTX wanted to be paid back in crypto, and Coinbase is a custodian that's been approved for the ETFs, that actually is the custodian for, I think, both parties taking crypto donations, I think Coinbase should be enabled to, be the custodian of some of these the FTX crypto that hasn't been sold, and they should be able to distribute it to the account holders. So I'm doing this in part. So we've taken the custodian part out.
Yep.
Like Bitcoin's a commodity. Why can't FTX distribute Bitcoin to, holders if that's how they want, to receive their payments back?
Yep.
I don't see a good reason why not. And look at the stable coins. Again, we have some district court decisions, but if the commission had an issue with USDC, they should have gone after USDC at this point. Like, they've had ample time to do it, and I'm not in any way suggesting that they should. I'm just saying that they could. So really, you're going against the will of bankrupt claim holders who want stable coins, who want Bitcoin. They probably want Ethereum too. And I'm not sure that this is serving the will of the people, and the account holders in the FTX bankruptcy.
David, to that point, I had a conversation with a colleague this past week on this specific case and the SEC raising the FTX bankruptcy, and his comment was interesting to me. It was essentially that this feels like the last gasp roadblocks of a
Mm,
regulator in an upcoming end of fiscal year
yeah.
and election year. And again, I'm not weighing on the merits of what they're saying or not saying. But David, Josh, to the point also, let's get into the kind of wonky details of it. If the Securities and Exchange Commission is going to say, well, these stable coins might be securities, whatever the argument is, and I'm paraphrasing, Josh, apologies. But wouldn't something that derives its value from an underlying asset not be a security directly, but a commodity or something under the CFTC purview? Or am I misunderstanding? And I've only had one cup of coffee, so one of you can tell me I'm absolutely wrong.
Go ahead, Josh.
Like what? Why would that? Let me just to simplify my stupid thought there, Josh. Is it clear to anyone that actually would be an SEC purview issue?
I mean, so I think it depends, right?
Mm-hmm.
What I would say is, I think with the SEC, in many cases, they're taking a broader view about how something is marketed, offered, and sold.
Got it.
And then
Okay.
it doesn't necessarily matter what it is if they're trying to shoehorn it that way.
Right.
I do think, it's certainly in the SEC v. Quanta from Labs case, they referred to, if I remember correctly, that stablecoin as a yield-bearing stablecoin, right?
Right.
Which, so there are, as we all know, there are many different kinds of stablecoins. But I mean, I agree with you about the last gasp.
Right.
Which of you said that? I mean, I do think it does make me wonder, though, more broadly, whether, because certainly my recollection is that SEC Chair Gensler has made statements in the past about stablecoins, saying something like they're used by people who want to get around something else. I forget what the exact language was, but it does make me think, when you hear about things, whether true or not, that perhaps Chair Gensler has his eye on Treasury or some other type of role. There are other regulators that could have their own concerns about stablecoins. Now, what I think is interesting, if I remember correctly, with this comment, I think that when the SEC pushed back about the FTX payment, I seem to recall some statement like, we're not addressing the legality of this, or some language like that. So what are you doing? What are you doing?
Yeah.
I mean, look, again, I feel like, in a situation where, individual, claim holders want to be paid back in their crypto, and like Bitcoin and USDC are not, cryptos that they, the SEC should have an issue with. I don't think that the, claim holders shouldn't be allowed to receive it. And don't forget, there are tax implications. That if that Bitcoin is
Right.
sold into fiat, whatever the basis was for those people's holdings, now they're going to have a taxable event. And boy, after, FTX going through bankruptcy and all that, and maybe people have losses, they're not getting 100 cents on the dollar, although they may. To also have a taxable event on top of that seems like a little bit of collective punishment.
Yeah. Shout out to, we should pull in Stephen Rutenberg and some of our bankruptcy colleagues to the conversation. We're overdue for that, and some of that stuff doesn't play out quickly. But to your point, David, some of the claim holders there might be in for a rude awakening. If we could, I wanted to pivot to something interesting, because we half joke about the election coming up, half not, because it is important. One of the news articles that kept popping up to me, or news stories, was, well, both campaigns seem pro crypto, and so campaign is now accepting crypto donations, and then you find out it's not directly accepting donations; it's through a PAC. David, you and I and Josh have the politics conversation a lot. I'm just going to say it. I'm not quite sure I buy into the narrative yet that both campaigns are suddenly supportive of crypto. Am I wrong? That was a softball. That's for you.
I'm laughing because somebody who's a listener to the podcast actually reached out and invited me to a Crypto for Harris event. And so, I think both candidates are courting this our industry. I feel like, former President Trump has been very clear about what his views are now. And he, gave them at, BTC 2024. In fairness, Vice President Harris just got elevated into the presidency, opportunity, quickly, and didn't have a chance to sort of prep on many things. But I think it's kind of a wait and see, and I think these events will be helpful to see what they have to say. I think that because she's part of this administration, I think that there's a presumption that economically she may follow the what's currently going on in this administration. But I think in fairness, we have to give her an opportunity, or her team an opportunity, to lay out their thoughts. But I do think that you have to pay attention to who they bring onto their team and what roles they've played in this administration when you evaluate what their potential roles could be.
You'll invite her to the live stream, right, David, when you go?
Listen, if she wants to come and join us, I'd be happy to have her.
Josh, go ahead.
I mean, I think we should keep an open mind. I agree with you. I agree, like that. We just don't know. On the Harris side, we've certainly seen on the Trump side that he has been very vocal about being pro crypto. I mean, I don't think you can get any more pro crypto than saying you're going to make the U.S. the crypto capital of the world, or whatever that language was. That being said, I feel like it would be a big step just to have something that is not actively anti-crypto. So I think going to pro-crypto would be fantastic. But in any event, I think we should continue to have discussions and education on both sides, because someone's going to win.
Yeah.
And I think making sure that, I don't know, not that I'm saying we should be hedging our bets, but we should be hedging our bets a little bit, I think, because we don't want to be viewed as an industry that is just, rejecting everything from one side and completely on the other side, because depending on who wins, we need to lie in the bed we made.
Yeah.
Right. So even neutral is a step in the right direction coming from any new administration.
I mean, I'd like to see it go further than neutral, but I do think, from what we've seen, including with the debt box case by our friend Jason Gottlieb, and
shout out to Jason.
There have been active, activities. Listen to me. There have been, efforts that go above and beyond in favor of being anti-crypto. So just removing some of the pressure from the neck might be helpful.
And I want to point out to the audience, like clockwork, we're a couple of minutes into a regulated conversation, and the sirens go off.
It's only in New York. Never happens when I'm in Florida. But I will say this. I agree with Josh completely. Look, we don't want to make it a partisan issue.
Yeah, agreed.
I think in fairness, considering how hostile this administration has been with the Operation Choke Point 2.0 and a lot of these enforcement cases, I think it's fair to want a platform from Vice President Harris's view on crypto and what she sees her administration's view on it is.
Yeah.
I think the status quo would make things challenging in the U.S., and I think growth would continue to happen outside of the U.S.
Yeah.
So I think we all have a vested interest in it, but I agree that we should all have an open mind and give her opportunity to share her position.
Yeah, and in fairness, she didn't need her own economic policy platform until 7 weeks ago.
Yeah.
This was do it quickly is tough when you're thinking about something as complex as economic policy. David, Josh. Yeah.
All right, Ron, I do want to mention I was on Polymarket this morning as I checked intermittently, and Trump is now favored 53 to 46 on Polymarket. And the reason why I mention that is I feel like in some ways the sentiment on Polymarket for the election some ways leans into the sentiment of our crypto markets. I think what I'm trying to do is follow that correlation between Polymarket and the crypto markets and see, as one candidate is doing better or worse, if there's any correlation between them.
Josh, do you feel David trying to pull us into a wager about the election? I'm going to repel that as strongly as I can, but did you get that sense, or is it just me?
I mean, I'm getting that sense. I'm starting to think that maybe David was a professional wagerer because that comment about 2008, 2009 and making the bet, and Ron, your reaction saying you'd have to be like, made of steel to make that bet. It seems like maybe David Brill made a bet at $2 for a city.
Well, look, all I can say is
no comment is going to say.
And look, everybody has winners and losers, for sure. But I've always been a little bit of a contrarian, and it's for the most part served me well. So, but saying that, like fundamentally though, going back to it, like for the crypto markets, if you're a believer in this ecosystem and where we're headed, these events are opportunities, and that's the way I would encourage people to think about it.
Yeah, I suspect David and I had a similar approach for the 2008 financial crisis. And again, for anyone in the audience, none of this is investment advice. And to counterbalance that, I totally called NVIDIA wrong and am totally underwater on that. But that's a whole other conversation. Josh, David, thank you so much. For everyone in the audience, again, thank you so much for joining us. If you've got comments for Josh or David or I, please put them in the chat. Or drop us a note, info@wsba.co. David, Josh, I wanted to go to one of the other topics we spoke about. David, I've been watching the Ethereum spot ETF flows, but you brought up, I think it was you who brought it up, or maybe Josh, apologies if I'm forgetting. Talk a little bit about the hacker threats we're seeing for crypto ETFs. Josh, was that you who added that to the agenda?
So it wasn't me, but so it must have been David. But yes, I mean, I think we've all been watching it. I mean, I'll pause for David if there's something he wants to frame it, but I'm happy to talk about it too.
The one thing I would say is we've talked about, the difficulty in becoming custodians for the ETFs and how they're concentrated in, a couple of places. And again, nothing against the places where they're being custodied. It's just we need to have more custodians. There need to be more options. And so there is some concentration risk. And we know there are a lot of threat actors. My company deals with, companies dealing with threat actors all the time. And this is, something you see across corporations and hospitals and all sorts of organizations. So we do have this concentration risk where a lot of Ethereum and a lot of Bitcoin are with, only a couple of custodians. So I do see that as a risk. I think the Ethereum picture is very interesting right now. And I'm curious, Ron, what do you think about it? It's sort of, decoupled a little bit from Bitcoin and the amount of, how much it's gone down.
So I agree with you about the decoupling. I'll confess to being a bit surprised at the downturn in prices on ETH. I do sort of see this. I kind of believe it's a bit of expectation regret in a way. I think a lot of people in the space looked at spot ETH ETFs, and I think you and I differed on this. I could be wrong. And it would have the same kind of run that the spot Bitcoin ETFs had. I believe we talked about that's probably not going to be the case.
Yeah.
And I think that when that's not the case, it kicks off a bunch of different futures perspectives on it. It kicks off a bunch of allocation perspectives on it. And I just don't think Ether spot ETFs have seen the allocations that a lot of people expected. And I think also in the context of markets might be a little scary. There's going to be an interest rate decrease, but is that good because jobs? So I think it's part of the macro conversation. As much money wasn't allocated to spot ETFs as everyone thought, the price is reflective of that. But Josh, you've said builders keep building, and when we see the capabilities of ETH as a use case, I go long-term value on that, David. To me, and again, this isn't a price recommendation, but I'll buy ETH at 2,000 something before I buy it at 5,000.
Yeah.
Josh, what do you think?
So, I mean, I think, well, two things. One has to do with the either spot ETF and one has to do with the hacking, right? So I do wonder, I mean, certainly we know that the ETFs, the requirement to remove staking, right? There's been talk about ETH staking ETFs, right, coming about in the future. But, one has to wonder whether, at least I wonder, whether maybe some of the lower inflows than expected are because people may not want to not be able to stake all that ETH, right? Because they're giving up a lot of upside potentially. And so one might say if you can hold ETH and stake it or have it staked for you, why would you move to something where you where there's no staking, right?
Yep.
Where you're somehow being diluted as time goes on. And so I think to that extent, one may say, okay, well, so maybe one would expect that some of the new flows coming in would be from people who never held ETH, right? Who are perhaps less crypto savvy, tech savvy, or something like that. And so they're just dipping their toes in. But in a way, it doesn't surprise me that if big players are right now staking and getting a return, right?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, it's a consensus mechanism, right? That's not the purpose of it. But I'm just saying, that's a lot to give up and to forgo. And so that's one thing. On the hacking or attempted hacking of ETFs, crypto ETFs, I think it's interesting. We certainly, it seems like social engineering and cyber attacks, are contemplated, and we saw the FBI warning that North Korea is targeting. They're targeting potentially the crypto ETFs and employing and launching these social engineering campaigns. I think they said against employees of DeFi, crypto, and similar businesses to deploy malware and steal company crypto.
Yeah.
So it's I mean, when you have hostile state actors, it's
I think the three of us have, and so many of our colleagues have been, I don't want to say targeted, but I think on a daily basis, we all receive these kind of phishing social engineering messages. So please do be careful out there, everyone. Josh, David, we're coming up on closing. Again, thank you everyone in the audience for joining us. I just want to point out one thing, Josh. Also, David's consistently raising his Jets cup. And I feel like that's the cue to ask about his perspectives now that football season is upon us.
Well, as you both know, this is my favorite time of year with college, football coming back and pro football coming back. And so I had thought about going to San Francisco this weekend to see the Jets play the Niners on Monday night, but it just didn't fit in with the schedule. But I am thrilled for football to be back, and I am going to extend my crystal ball to football picks and say that I think the Jets will beat San Francisco on Monday night.
For the record, I will never bet you. I will never wager on sports ever, David. I'm sorry. Josh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just wondering, by the way, this is apropos of absolutely nothing. But David, what is on your shirt? Does that have something to do with crypto sports?
No, it has to do with sports. The US Open is in New York these 2 weeks, and I was fortunate to go. And so I really enjoyed being there, and it's great to see the energy around tennis and sports. And so I had a good fortune to be there, and I happen to like this shirt, so I wore it since it's going on, and the semifinals are today.
I want to point out for the audience as well, because David's a dear friend of both Josh and I, that he's pushing the jealousy button when he sends us pictures of him courtside at the US Open, Josh. I don't know about you, a little envious that day.
It was just sharing amongst friends.
I know. We were very happy for you, my friend.
Well,
Josh?
it was 90 degrees that day too, so I earned sitting in those seats.
You did, my friend. You did. Josh, anything you want to cover before we wrap it up?
No, I mean, I feel like there are so many topics that one could talk about that there's not really sufficient time to delve into any of them with any depth. But I think, there's a lot. There's a lot out there.
We'll extend the broadcast time going forward. Again, for everyone in the audience, thank you for joining us. One shout out I'll do. David, Josh, you hear this from me on a daily basis. Thursday, October 24th in New York City, the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance Crypto and Blockchain Summit 2024. Sign up, info@WSBA.co, or go to the WSBA.co website. There's a link to register. We have blast out to our colleagues in different parts of the industry: law, banking, trading, tech, a little bit of accounting expertise, believe it or not. You'll get to see Josh Klayman on stage. You'll get to see David Brill on stage. So if you can join us, that would be great. Please do sign up. And I will share with the audience as well. I keep bringing up the wager. I'm just going to concede now. We're probably not going to hit my BTC target, David. So pick the steakhouse and let's just make the reservation, because the suspense is killing me.
You know what, Ron? I'm not giving up on you, because look, And I'll tell you what I'm sharing, what I'm looking at this weekend, but also I'm going to share the corollary for Ron's sake. I'm really looking at 2,000 at ETH and 50,000, big round numbers on Bitcoin as areas we really need to watch.
Mm.
If we really were to push below either of those, then we could see an accelerated sell-off. So those are areas I'm going to be paying attention to. On the flip side, Ron, when we get back to an all-time high, we're going to see real acceleration.
Yep.
A lot of people will have felt they missed the opportunity. They'll certainly have missed it here, and they'll miss that opportunity. And I think you'll see a lot of people pour into the market. So I wouldn't give up yet.
Don't give up yet.
But my informal polling still has, Strip House, Peter Luger, and Porterhouse in the top 3 in Manhattan. So that's where you're trending right now.
Listen, and to be fair, Josh, you're part of this as well, so you get to weigh in on the venue.
I'm just along for the ride. You guys decide on the place. David Brill knows I like when people order for me at when we're out with friends. If someone volunteers to order, I'm like, yeah.
Josh likes the place picked and her meal picked for her.
Yes,
she's very happy to be along.
Exactly. But there is one thing, actually, I will just mention this because there is an interesting article on CoinDesk right now about Telegram. And certainly we saw the head of Telegram arrested recently in France, which we talked about last time. It was reported yesterday, I believe, that, Thursday night, that Telegram is, quote, radically altering its stance towards illegal use of its messaging days after CEO Pavel Durov was arrested in France for allegedly failing to police law-breaking content. And it said that Telegram extended its moderator's reach to include private chats. For the first time, users in private chats can flag, quote, flag illegal content for review. And that evidently is written on a change to Telegram's FAQ page. And that is... I was reading from that article that I mentioned that is on CoinDesk now. Now, I will say that arrest, one may say, has little to nothing to do with crypto. It's just, I think it's important that we distinguish that.
Yeah.
That being said, prior to this arrest, I had heard a number of projects start talking about potentially building on the Ton blockchain, which I hadn't heard about in some time. So I guess we'll see. Oh, and I see Sonia has listed some comments. She said, AI bots on the blockchain, an interesting topic, and Coinbase announcement.
Which Coinbase announcement?
I think Coinbase announced that 2 AI bots paid crypto to each other.
Oh, yes. I did see that already.
One received it, and, that's definitely interesting. And
Skynet is coming, David. Josh, I have to ask one question about the Telegram CEO, and I hate that I'm putting my conspiracy theorist hat on here. Didn't the United States government put that person on the most wanted list or something like that, or issuing a warrant?
So it's really interesting because I saw that yesterday.
Yep.
And then I also saw something that someone else had shared with me that said that wasn't true. So I actually don't know now. But it wouldn't surprise me because, as we said last week, I mean, unofficially, unsubstantiated, I had heard, as maybe you guys may have as well, that the U.S. government actually played a role in France arresting Durov, and that acting alone, France likely would not have arrested him. So I think, but that, again, I don't think that's because of crypto. I think to the extent it's true, assuming arguendo it's true, I think it's more about viewing technology in general through a national security lens, right? And thinking about things like the BSA,
And to that point, shout out to Dina Ellis, who does the policy updates with us, and the three of us know her well. She's brought up for years now that one of the overlays to all of this from the government's perspective will be national security. So it will, which is an important topic, and we obviously understand the importance of adhering to national security guidelines. It'll be just interesting to see how that develops. We've got a little bit of a shortened episode today. Josh, you're heading for, I'm assuming, your private jet. David, you've got the yacht waiting for the trip back down to Miami. We'll leave it there, my friends. Good to see you both. For everyone in the audience, if you didn't get a chance, drop us a note info@wsba.co if you got questions for David, Josh, or I. Register for October 24th if you can join us in person in New York City. I'm looking forward to seeing you all there. Josh, David, as always, it's a privilege. Great to see you both.
Great to see you guys.
Cheers. Bye-bye.